My name is Becky Fiddler, 29 years old. By the time I reached my parents' house that Thanksgiving, I already knew how the evening would go. The house would smell like overcooked turkey and anxiety. My mother would sharpen her words the same way she sharpened the carving knife, precisely deliberately, and everyone else would laugh as if cruelty were a family sport. When I stepped through the doorway, the ritual began on cue. Becky, finally decided to grace us with your presence, Mom announced, her voice loud enough to summon the neighbors. She eyed my dark-tailored blazer, lips curling. Still playing dress-up, I see. Armani again. At least you're consistent in your delusions. My father didn't even look up from pouring wine. Consistency is all she's got, Margaret. I smiled faintly, that small, polite smile I'd perfected over the years. Good to see you too, Dad. The dining table gleamed beneath the chandelier, an exaggerated battlefield of fine china and old resentments. My siblings were already seated. David, the golden boy of the family, wore his favorite smug expression. Emma, the youngest, looked ready to pounce at the first opportunity to score social points. As I took my seat, Mom continued narrating my life to the table as if I weren't there. You know, Becky's always been a dreamer, still pretending she's some Wall Street executive when she's just counting cash at that little bank in Queens. A ripple of laughter circled the table. Uncle Robert raised his glass. Hey, nothing wrong with honest work. Not everyone can be a big shot like David here. David beamed. Thanks, Uncle Robert. I didn't answer. Silence was often the best defense. It made them uncomfortable, like they needed my humiliation to be complete. Aunt Linda, self-appointed fashion police, leaned forward. Tell us, Becky, where does a bank teller get the money for Armani? Or did you max out your credit cards again? Dad sighed heavily, like my existence was a financial burden he'd been forced to co-sign. That's what worries me. Living beyond your means. It's time you faced reality. I set my fork down. And what's that reality exactly? That you're not who you pretend to be, he said firmly. You work at a small community bank. You process deposits, you stamp checks. It's honest work, but it's not. He gestured vaguely at my clothes, whatever fantasy you're selling. David nodded sagely. Exactly. There's dignity in accepting who you are, Becky. The irony was almost poetic. My brother processed insurance claims for a living, yet he lectured me on professional humility. I sipped my wine, letting the sting slide down smoother than their judgment. Emma grinned, holding up her phone. Guys, you should see Becky's apartment. Manhattan rent on a bank teller's salary. It's hilarious. My cousins leaned in to laugh. One of them, Michael. Barely 20, added. My professor says people who live beyond their means usually have insecurity issues. They crave validation. Exactly, Mom said, clinking her fork against her plate for emphasis. All this luxury. The clothes, the apartment, it's compensation for feeling inadequate. Honey, there's nothing wrong with being ordinary. Their words pricked like paper cuts, tiny, predictable, almost boring. I'd heard every version before. They never changed the script. What they didn't know was that every detail they mocked the suits. The address, the car, had been carefully chosen to project power, not to impress them, but to earn the trust of men who signed billion-dollar deals. Still watching their laughter, I felt the old ache of wanting to be understood. Here's to Becky finally accepting reality, Uncle Robert said, raising his wine, to finding contentment in Queens. They all toasted. I joined in expression serene. Then Aunt Linda leaned close, lowering her voice conspiratorially. I heard that tiny bank of yours is being bought out soon. You'll be lucky to keep your teller job. My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from the irony. The merger she referenced was one of mine. Dad frowned thoughtfully. She should really start looking for something stable. Maybe customer service at a bigger company. Good idea, David said. And stop dressing like a CEO. It makes people uncomfortable. Speaking of CEOs, Emma interrupted brightly. I just got promoted, assistant manager at my marketing firm. 48,000 plus benefits. The table erupted in applause. Dad's face glowed with pride. Now that's something to celebrate. Real progress through hard work. Uncle Robert lifted his glass. Finally, a success story. I clapped politely, genuinely happy for her. But the undercurrent was unmistakable. Every cheer for Emma was another dig at me. Then, right on cue, my phone buzzed in my lap. Once, twice, then again. Mom narrowed her eyes. No phones at the table, Becky? Family time. It might be important, I said quietly. David snorted. Please. What could be so urgent at a community bank? The buzzing stopped, then started again, almost immediately. The sound seemed to slice through the laughter. Sarah always thinks her job is so important, Michael joked. Probably some customer forgot their PIN. I forced a calm smile, but my pulse quickened. That particular vibration pattern wasn't random. It was priority one. I should take this, I said, standing. Dad's voice cut through the tension. Sit down. It's Thanksgiving dinner. Your fake emergencies can wait. The phone stopped. Silence. Then 3 messages arrived back to back. Then another call. Mom crossed her arms. You're being dramatic. Nobody calls a teller after hours. Sit down and act normal. But that alert sequence only came from one source, my assistant's emergency line. I rose slowly. I'm sorry, but this really can't wait. They groaned collectively as I stepped into the kitchen, their muttered insults following behind like a chorus. Hello, I answered softly. Director Williams came the voice of Janet, measured, professional, and urgent. Apologies for disturbing your holiday, but the Italian Regulatory Board just accelerated the Meridian Castellano review. We'll need your approval by tomorrow evening Rome time. The words hit like an electric switch flipping on. In an instant, the dinner table vanished from my mind. I straightened unconsciously, my voice shifting to command mode. What are the restructuring implications? They want European distribution rights under a subsidiary. It changes the debt allocation by roughly $400 million. Legal says it's doable but risky without your authorization. Send the amended term sheets to my secure line, I said. Set up a video conference with legal in Rome in 1 hour. Yes, Director, I'll notify Marcus and Alessandro. Good. And Janet, thank you for catching this quickly. Of course. The call ended. I stood there staring at the kitchen tiles, letting the weight of both worlds settle back into place, the absurdity of my family's contempt colliding with the reality of an $8.7 billion crisis awaiting my decision. When I returned to the dining room, every face turned toward me, expectant and irritated. Everything okay, Dad asked, mock concern in his voice. Nobody's savings account in danger. I smiled faintly, returning to my seat. Everything's fine. See, Mom said triumphantly. Never an actual emergency. Emma giggled. Probably a lost debit card. I took a slow sip of wine, the taste sharper now, almost metallic. If only they knew. Outside, the night wind pressed against the window panes. The house was warm, but I'd never felt colder. Dinner resumed as if nothing had happened. Though the air felt heavier now, brittle charged. I could sense my phone's presence in my pocket, like a living thing, still glowing with unread messages. The buzzing had stopped, but that silence felt temporary deceptive, the kind that only comes before something breaks. See, Emma said between mouthfuls of stuffing. She probably just answered a spam call. Cousin Michael chuckled. Or maybe someone needed their checkbook balanced urgently. The table erupted again in laughter, that mean, familiar laughter that never failed to remind me where I stood in this family hierarchy. I kept my composure, cutting my turkey calmly. The blade of my fork scraped the plate, a small, precise sound that steadied me. Honestly, Becky, Mom said, shaking her head with theatrical disappointment, you can't let work control you like that. It's not healthy. What kind of customer needs your help during Thanksgiving dinner? Dad leaned forward. You need to set boundaries. It's unprofessional. I smiled faintly. I'll keep that in mind. If only they understood that the customer was a multinational pharmaceutical conglomerate teetering on the edge of a failed merger. If only they knew that $400 million could vanish from a balance sheet while they debated the ethics of checking work emails. The phone buzzed again. This time the pattern was different, a brief vibration, then a pause, then 2 long pulses. Marcus from legal. I didn't even have to look. My body already knew the code. Emma rolled her eyes. Seriously. Again, Dad's tone sharpened. No, enough. Put the phone away. Whatever fantasy you're maintaining can wait until dessert. I forced a breath through my nose. Dad, it's important. He pointed his fork at me like a gavel. No job is that important for someone in your position. If your little bank collapses without you, it deserves to fail. The phone buzzed again, insistent, urgent, unrelenting, and something inside me cracked just slightly. All right, I said quietly, my voice colder than I intended. If you're so curious about what kind of calls I get, I'll answer right here. Dad leaned back, crossing his arms. Go ahead. Let's hear this emergency. I took out the phone. The table went silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I pressed answer and set it on speaker. Director Williams Marcus's voice came through crisp and clipped. Sorry to disturb you, but Janet said you'd want a briefing before the Rome conference. Every head around the table lifted. My name sounded alien in his tone, formal weighted. That's fine, I said evenly, my professional cadence slipping in automatically. What's changed? The Italians are pushing for governance restructuring within the subsidiary clause. If we don't respond by tomorrow morning, we risk violating their new regulatory framework. We'll need your sign-off before we can proceed. Adjust the subsidiary debt split to 60-40 and inform Alessandro I'll review their forecast tonight. If compliance raises issues, we can restructure through London. Yes, Director. Should I prepare the amended agreement? Do it, I said, and flag it for my digital signature. I'll review everything before the call. Yes, ma'am. The entire table was frozen. Forks hovered in midair. The only sound was the faint clink of a spoon falling onto a plate. Thank you, Marcus, I said calmly. That'll be all. Of course, Director Williams. The line clicked off. The silence afterward was absolute. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Uncle Robert blinked first. Did he just call you director? I picked up my wine glass. That's correct. David frowned. Director of what exactly? Managing director, I said quietly. Investment banking division. Mom laughed a brittle, nervous laugh. Oh, stop. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not. You work at that little bank in Queens. I set my glass down. No, Mom. I never said that. You assumed it. Emma's eyes darted between me and the phone like she was watching a magician's trick. Wait, are you saying you actually work on Wall Street? Yes. With Goldman Sachs? Yes. Aunt Linda let out a small strangled gasp. That's impossible. Dad leaned forward, voice unsteady now. You're telling me you're some kind of big-shot banker? Not some kind, I said softly. The kind you've been reading about at dinner. The one leading the deal you were all gossiping over 10 minutes ago. Their expressions were almost comical, a slow-motion collapse of certainty. The Meridian-Castellano merger I added is mine. Uncle Robert's mouth opened. That's the one worth billions. 8.7, I corrected automatically. Mom's wineglass trembled. Becky, are you serious? I nodded. I manage mergers and acquisitions for pharmaceutical and biotech companies. That's what I do. That's where the Armani suits come from. That's why I live in Manhattan. That's why my phone doesn't stop buzzing. No one spoke. The silence stretched so long that I could hear my own heartbeat. Emma was the first to break it. So, all these years we thought you were lying. You were, I said voice level, but I stopped trying to convince you. It was easier to let you believe what you wanted. Dad stared at me utterly still. Why wouldn't you tell us? Because you never listened, I said simply. You didn't want to know who I was, only who you decided I was. The turkey steam rose between us, carrying the faint scent of rosemary and regret. Mom's eyes shimmered with something uncertain guilt, or disbelief, maybe both. We were only trying to keep you grounded. Grounded, I echoed. You kept me buried. Aunt Linda shifted uncomfortably. But the bank in Queens. Due diligence, I interrupted. Goldman has been evaluating it for acquisition. I visited several times this year. You saw me leaving one of those meetings and drew your own conclusions. The revelation seemed to physically deflate them. The air went out of the room. Finally, Uncle Robert muttered, So you're the one who decides if that bank lives or dies? I met his eyes. Essentially, yes. The fireplace crackled. My nephew Jake stared at me with wide eyes. Wait, does that mean you, move billions of dollars around? I almost smiled. Roughly. David rubbed his temples, his voice barely above a whisper. You're telling us you're richer than all of us combined. It's not about that, I said quietly. It never was. But they didn't hear the emotion under my calmness. They only heard the numbers. Mom finally found her voice again, fragile and small. Becky, we had no idea. I looked around the table at every familiar face that had mocked me for years and felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something colder. I know, I said. You never asked. And for the first time all night, no one had anything left to say. No one moved. The clinking, the chewing, the forced laughter, all the usual dinner sounds had vanished. My family sat frozen in disbelief, staring at me as though I'd spoken in another language. Dad was the first to find his voice, but it cracked halfway through. You're saying you're in charge of billion-dollar mergers? Yes, I said simply. That's what a managing director does. Aunt Linda blinked rapidly as if trying to clear the fog in her mind. At Goldman Sachs, the real one on Wall Street. The real one, I replied evenly. The building on West Street, 43 floors up. That's where my office is. The chandelier light flickered against the stunned faces around me. My mother's hand trembled against her wineglass. But you studied art history, she whispered. I did, I said. And later I went to business school. Worked my way up from analyst to associate, then vice president, then director. I became managing director last year. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. But why didn't you tell us? Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said. You never do. For years I'd imagined this moment. how it might feel to finally drop the facade, to stop pretending I was someone smaller just to make them comfortable. I thought it would feel good, liberating. But as I watched their faces twist in confusion and guilt, all I felt was a dull ache. "You let us sit here and laugh at you," Emma said softly. "You let us call you a failure." "I didn't let you," I said, meeting her eyes. "You chose to." Dad pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. "Becky, that's not fair. We were trying to protect you from disappointment." "Disappointment," I repeated. "You were protecting yourselves from being wrong about me." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt in that house. Cousin Michael finally broke it, his voice faintly incredulous. "So, when you left dinner to answer that call, you were actually handling an $8 billion deal." 8.7, I corrected. Pharmaceutical merger. Italy's regulatory board advanced their timeline. My team needed immediate approval. Mom's face paled. "Your team?" "Legal compliance and international finance," I said. "London, Rome, and New York offices." Emma let out a shaky laugh that sounded half like a sob. "And here we thought you were helping customers deposit checks." Uncle Robert rubbed a hand over his face. "Jesus." Dad looked like he was aging right before my eyes. His posture slumped, the lines around his mouth deepening. "All this time, you've been living a lie. I tilted my head slightly. "No, Dad. You've been living your version of me." A tense quiet settled again. Mom finally spoke, her voice small, stripped of its usual authority. "We just wanted you to have a normal life, something stable, safe. You were always so ambitious, Becky. It scared us." "I know," I said softly, "but ambition isn't a disease." She blinked at me, eyes glistening. "You could have told us." "I tried," I said. "Every time I mentioned work, you changed the subject or assumed I was exaggerating. It stopped being worth the effort." David shifted in his seat. His earlier smugness had evaporated. "You could have at least corrected us. When we joked about your apartment, your car." "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "You all had already decided who I was. Anything I said would have just sounded like more pretending." No one argued. Uncle Robert, who had spent years mocking me for acting above my station, cleared his throat. "So, this deal you're managing, what happens if it goes wrong?" I glanced toward my buzzing phone, which now sat face down on the table. Then $8 billion vanish from a balance sheet, 3 companies fall apart, and hundreds lose their jobs. That's why I needed to take the call. His eyes widened. "Good Lord." Mom whispered $8 billion, under her breath, as if saying it might make it less real. "Jake, my teenage nephew, was frantically typing on his phone. It says here that Goldman Sachs managing directors make..." He paused, reading like $1 to $2 million a year. "Is that true?" The room held its breath again. "Sometimes more," I said. "Depends on performance." A fork slipped from Emma's hand, clattering onto her plate. "Oh my God." Dad leaned back, exhaling through his nose. He looked at me, not as a daughter, but as something foreign, someone he didn't know how to categorize. "All this time we thought you were lost," he murmured. "Turns out you were just out of reach." I didn't answer. There was no way to bridge that chasm in a single dinner. The old family portrait hung on the wall beside the table, my teenage self smiling awkwardly between Emma's perfect curls and David's Letterman jacket. Mom had arranged that photo after I left for college, back when they still believed I'd grow out of wanting more. I wondered if they saw it now the way I did, a perfect lie frozen in time. Aunt Linda tried to speak, failed, then finally managed. "You must think we're terrible people." I shook my head. "No, just people who underestimated me." Mom's hands fidgeted with her napkin. "Becky, we didn't mean to make you feel small." "You didn't make me feel small," I said quietly. "You made me feel invisible." Her eyes filled instantly, and for the first time in years, she had no clever retort. The house creaked under the weight of things unsaid. Then my phone buzzed again, short, sharp, insistent. The sound jolted everyone back to reality. Emma glanced at it warily. "Is that another billion-dollar crisis?" "Probably," I said. "Italy's regulatory board doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving." Dad's voice softened unexpectedly. "You can take it. We'll wait." The shift was subtle but real. For the first time in my life, I had his permission to be who I actually was. I nodded once and stood, feeling all their eyes follow me as I walked toward the kitchen again. Before stepping out, I turned back to the table. "You were right about one thing, though." Mom looked up, startled. "What's that?" "There's dignity in accepting who you are." And for the first time, they understood what that truly meant. When I returned from the kitchen, the air in the dining room had changed. The warmth from the fire still glowed across the tablecloth, but the laughter, the judgment, the noise, it had all evaporated. Now there was only the sound of shifting cutlery, soft throat clearing, and the hum of a family, recalibrating everything they thought they knew about me. Mom was the first to speak. Her tone was tentative, unfamiliar, like someone learning a language she hadn't used in years. "Becky, sweetheart, we owe you an apology." I smiled faintly. For what? For everything she said, quickly, eyes glistening. For assuming. For mocking you. For her voice cracked, for making you feel like your work didn't matter. I wanted to feel relief. I wanted to feel vindicated, but instead all I felt was the quiet exhaustion of someone who had stopped needing an apology years ago. "You don't need to apologize," I said softly. "You were acting on what you believed." "That doesn't make it right," Dad murmured. He was staring into his wineglass the same way he used to look into his coffee mug before scolding me for another irresponsible choice. Now he couldn't meet my eyes. Mom hesitated. "We thought we were protecting you. We thought ambition would only hurt you. You've always been so intense." I gave a small laugh. "You say that like it's a flaw." She flinched a little. "It's not. I just didn't understand it back then." Emma finally broke the tension, her voice trembling. "Becky, we were awful to you." I met her gaze. "You were younger. You followed their lead." "I knew what I was doing," she said quickly. God, I thought you were pretending, that you were embarrassed to be normal." "I wasn't embarrassed," I said. "I was just tired of being underestimated." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint tick of the clock. Then Uncle Robert sighed deeply, setting down his fork. "I've said a lot of stupid things to you over the years. Jokes that weren't really jokes. That speech I gave about accepting reality." He swallowed. "That was cruel. I'm sorry." I studied his face, the man who once lectured me about knowing my place. Now he looked smaller, his voice stripped of arrogance. "I know you meant well," I said gently, "even if it didn't feel that way." He nodded, shame written all over him. Cousin Patricia, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." How did you do it? I mean, art history to Goldman Sachs. It's insane." I smiled. A lot of nights working, while everyone else slept. A lot of people underestimating me, which turned out to be a good motivator. And one professor who told me I'd never survive in finance, so I made sure I did. Jake's eyes lit up with awe. "That's actually really cool." "Thank you," I said and meant it. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy with ridicule, it was quiet with respect. A strange, fragile kind of reverence. Then Dad spoke again, voice hoarse. "You were right earlier, you know. We never asked." I looked at him surprised. His shoulders sagged, like the words had cost him something. "I spent so long thinking I knew what was best for my kids," he said slowly. "I guess I didn't realize I was just trying to make them fit my comfort zone." Mom reached for his hand. "We just wanted to keep you close." I nodded, and in doing that you pushed me away. Her lips trembled. "You must have hated us." "No," I said quietly. "I loved you. I just learned to stop expecting you to love all of me." The words landed hard, but there was no cruelty in them, just truth. It hurt because it was honest. Emma's eyes filled. "I would have been proud of you," she whispered. "If I'd known." I held her gaze. "Would you, though? Or would you have found a new reason to criticize me too ambitious, too arrogant, too distant?" She flinched. "Maybe." There was no malice between us, only recognition, two women suddenly seeing the space-time and pride had carved between them. Dad cleared his throat again. "So, what happens now?" "What do you mean?" "Now that we know who you really are," he said, "do we get to be part of that world?" I hesitated, considering him carefully. "You've always been part of my world, Dad. You just never noticed." His eyes softened. "Then I guess it's time we start paying attention." The room fell into an almost sacred stillness, the kind that comes after a storm when everything broken still stands but differently. Aunt Linda dabbed her eyes with her napkin. "Well," she said quietly, "I feel like a fool." "Don't," I said gently. "Everyone assumes until they're given a reason not to." Mom laughed through her tears. "And you gave us a hell of a reason." We shared a fragile, genuine smile, our first in years. Then my phone buzzed again, sharp and insistent. This time no one glared. No one sighed. Dad gestured toward it. "Go ahead, Becky. Take your call." I looked around the table, stunned. "Really?" He nodded. $8 billion waits for no one. The others laughed softly, not mockingly this time, but with an awkward admiration. I smiled, a real one this time, and rose from my chair. "Thank you." As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard Emma whisper, "She's incredible." And for the first time in my life, I believe she meant it. When I returned from my call, 20 minutes, 3 time zones, 2 lawyers, and 1 crisis temporarily averted, the dining room had shifted from disbelief to a strange kind of reverence. The same people who had once laughed at my fake job now looked at me like I was someone they'd never met before. Mom stood up the moment I entered. "Becky," she said softly, "we didn't mean to ruin your holiday." "You didn't ruin it," I replied, hanging my blazer on the back of the chair. "It just changed." Dad cleared his throat. "We've been talking," he said, "and we all agreed we owe you a lot more than an apology." I arched an eyebrow, a half smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "You've been holding a family meeting without me," Uncle Robert chuckled weakly. "A damage control meeting, more like." That drew a laugh around the table, small, cautious, but real. It felt like the house exhaled after hours of holding its breath. Mom stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I always thought we were helping you stay humble, but maybe we were just afraid. Afraid of losing you to a world we didn't understand." I met her eyes, and for the first time in years, saw not disapproval, but something that looked like pride fighting its way through guilt. "You didn't lose me," I said gently. "I just stopped inviting you into the parts of me you refused to see." Her lips trembled. "I know." Emma stood up next, her eyes glassy. "Becky, I said awful things to you. I was jealous, okay? You were always the one who dared to leave, and I stayed. You were living a life I couldn't even imagine, and I made it sound ridiculous because it hurt that it wasn't mine." I took her hand. "You don't have to apologize for being human." She gave a tearful laugh. "You always say things like that, like you've already forgiven people before they even ask." "Maybe because forgiveness is cheaper than resentment," I said with a small shrug. That earned another soft laugh, and this time even Dad smiled. But his expression sobered quickly. "Becky, I failed you." "Dad!" "No, listen to me," he said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. His voice cracked with emotion. I hadn't heard from him since I was a child. "I spent your whole life trying to make you smaller, because I thought the world would crush you if you aimed too high. I didn't realize you'd grow taller than all of us." The words caught me off guard. My throat tightened, but I didn't interrupt him. He took a deep breath. "You don't need my approval anymore, but you should have had it long ago." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "That means more than you think." For a while, no one spoke. The hum of the heater filled the silence, and the soft clinking of wine glasses replaced years of cutting remarks. Then Aunt Linda, dabbing at her eyes, said, "Well, I guess that's one family tradition we can retire mocking Becky at dinner." That drew genuine laughter this time, and for the first time all night, I felt warmth that wasn't forced. Mom looked around this table, her voice firm but kind. "Let's make a new one, no more, assuming no more tearing each other down. We listen even when we don't understand." "That's progress," I said, smiling. Jake, my teenage nephew, piped up timidly. "Can I ask something?" "Sure. Do you, ever get scared? You sound so confident." That one made me pause. I thought of the sleepless nights, the risk of failure at every turn, the pressure that never eased. All the time, I admitted. But confidence isn't the absence of fear, it's deciding something matters more than being afraid. He nodded, eyes wide, like I'd just handed him a secret he'd been waiting for. Then, as if the universe couldn't resist testing our fragile truce, my phone buzzed again. No one frowned. No one rolled their eyes. Mom smiled faintly. "Go ahead, honey. Save the world again." I laughed quietly. "It's not that dramatic." Still, Dad said, raising his glass. "Whatever it is, I'm sure it's important." Their willingness to understand even just a little felt heavier than all their previous insults combined. I stood, sliding my phone out of my pocket. "Actually, I'll take this one later," I said, smiling. "Right now, I'd rather finish dinner." Mom's relief was almost palpable. "Good, because I made pumpkin pie and it deserves your attention too." The rest of the evening unfolded like a fragile truce sealed by laughter. The conversation turned lighter. Emma talking about her promotion, Uncle Robert sharing old family stories that no longer stung Dad, asking small, genuine questions about my work that I answered in simple terms. It wasn't perfect, but it was something new, curiosity instead of contempt, pride instead of pity. When the plates were cleared and the fire had burned low, I stood to leave. Mom followed me to the door, holding my coat like she used to when I was a teenager, sneaking out past curfew. "You'll come for Christmas, won't you?" she asked quietly. "Of course," I said, smiling, "though I might have to take a few work calls." "Take as many as you need," Dad said from the dining room. "Whatever helps you keep that world turning." I slipped into my coat, feeling their eyes on me. "Thank you for dinner," I said. It was surprisingly memorable. Emma laughed through her tears. "You mean historic?" "Maybe a little." As I stepped out into the cold, Mom's voice followed me. "Becky." I turned. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Truly." For once, she didn't sound like she was trying to convince herself. "Thank you, Mom," I said softly. "That means more than you know." The door closed behind me, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like it was shutting me out. The night air outside was crisp and sharp, the kind that bit at your skin just enough to make you feel alive. The street was quiet except for the faint hum of passing cars and the rustle of leaves swirling across the sidewalk. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch, exhaling the weight of an entire lifetime of misunderstanding. The door behind me clicked shut. No voices followed, no barbed comments or pitying sighs. Just silence. Strange, clean silence. As I walked toward my car, the world felt different, though nothing visible had changed. The same streetlights glowed along the cul-de-sac. The same neat suburban lawns stretched out around me. But for once, I wasn't shrinking to fit into this neighborhood's version of me. I was leaving as myself. Inside the car, the familiar glow of my dashboard lit up. My phone vibrated again before I'd even started the engine. Janet, my assistant. I tapped the Bluetooth connection. "Go ahead," I said. Director Williams just confirming the updated schedule, she said, her tone brisk but warm. "The Rome and London teams are aligned. We're ready for your input on the subsidiary governance terms whenever you're online." "Good," I said, starting the engine. "Tell Marcus I'll join the video call in 40 minutes. Have the revised documents uploaded to my secure drive." "Understood." "Oh," and she hesitated, then added, "the team asked me to thank you for handling all this tonight. Everyone knows it's Thanksgiving over there." A small smile tugged at my lips. "Tell them I'm grateful for their time. And Janet." "Yes. Order dinner for the whole team. My card." "Already done," she said, amused. "You know us too well." "Good. We'll need the energy." "Have a safe drive back, Director." The call ended with a soft beep, leaving only the hum of the heater and the muted city glow in the distance. I drove in silence for a while, watching the empty streets slip by. Somewhere behind me, my family was probably still talking, revising years of stories, reframing memories to make sense of what they'd just learned. Maybe there was guilt, maybe pride, maybe confusion. Probably all of it. And though part of me wanted to be angry for the years they doubted me, I wasn't. Not anymore. Anger required energy, and I had long since redirected mine into building something far more useful: power, independence, control. Still, a small ache pulsed beneath the calm, because as satisfying as it was to finally be seen, it was also lonely. Power and distance often came as a pair. By the time I reached my apartment building in Manhattan, the city was glowing beneath the night sky, glass towers glittering like constellations. The doorman greeted me with his usual warmth. "Evening, Ms. Williams. Working late again." "Always," I said, smiling faintly as I passed through the marble lobby. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Hair slightly tousled from the drive. Dark eyes, steady, but tired. For a moment, I imagined what my mother would see if she stood beside me now, not the daughter she pitied, but the woman she'd never taken the time to understand. The doors opened onto my floor. Inside my apartment, the city unfolded through the panoramic windows, New York, pulsing alive, endless. I kicked off my heels, set my phone on the desk, and powered on my computer. The screens lit up with spreadsheets, legal briefs, and regulatory filings. The hum of the city below synced with the rhythm of my work. It felt almost poetic, the merger documents glowing across the monitor, while the skyline shimmered, outside a perfect blend of chaos and control. A new message popped up: incoming conference. Rome/London teams. I clicked accept, slipping effortlessly back into my other skin. Faces appeared across time zones. Marcus from legal, Janet from New York, Alessandro from Rome. Voices layering in polite urgency. Director Williams. "We're proposing to adjust the debt allocation ratio. Compliance wants assurance on the European Governance Clause. Rome's regulators require confirmation by 9 a.m. local time." I listened, nodded, issued instructions. Calm, clear, commanding. The same woman they'd doubted for years, now orchestrating billions with the ease of breathing. Somewhere between clauses and contingencies, my phone buzzed again. A text. Emma. "Still can't believe my sister is a Goldman Sachs managing director. Mom's Googling you right now. Dad says he's going to learn about mergers before Christmas dinner." I couldn't help but laugh quietly. The sound surprised even me. Soft, genuine, almost wistful. I typed back, "Me tell them they can start with Investopedia. It's free." A typing bubble appeared. Emma. "We're proud of you, Becky. I'm sorry it took us this long to say it." I stared at the screen for a moment before replying, "Me better late than never." I set the phone aside and turned back to the glowing monitors. Alessandro was still talking about Italian compliance adjustments, but his words faded for a moment as I looked past him out the window, where the reflection of my face hovered over the glittering city. This was the truth of who I was, the woman behind the title. Not the daughter trying to earn approval, not the sister proving her worth, but the architect of her own world. I took a breath, steady and quiet, then said into the microphone, "All right, team, let's close this deal." Dozens of voices echoed back, unified across continents. And as I began walking them through the numbers, debt ratios, terms, structures, forecasts, the thought drifted softly through my mind like the closing line of a private story only I would ever hear. The truth doesn't change who you are. It only changes who people think you are. Outside, the city lights flickered like applause, and I got back to work.